Hello and welcome to PowerServer 2017, the .NET version of the developer installation and prerequisites. For PowerServer 2017 web or mobile, the developer configuration requires before you install Windows 7 through version 10 and either a 32 or 64-bit version of the operating system. Notice that 10 is highlighted and 64. In this video, I'll be using Windows 10 Fall Creator Edition and the 64-bit version. Appeon PowerBuilder 2017 Universal Edition will be required. The Universal Edition includes the PowerServer Toolkit. When you install PowerServer, it will ask you to install demo applications. It's highly recommended that you install those. The demo applications will require SQL Anywhere, either version 16 or 17. Again, you can use the 32 or 64-bit version of the server. For this particular video, I'm using the 64-bit version. PowerServer requires the .NET Framework 4 or above, so 4.x will reflect the version for 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, depending on whether you're using Windows 7 through up to and including Windows 10. The Internet Information Server, or IIS, will be required as well. That's because PowerServer itself installs as a subservice underneath that particular application server. In other words, it's really a helper to IIS. PowerServer 2017 is included with PowerBuilder 2017 Universal. So now you have some choices. So when you're installing PowerBuilder 2017 Universal, which will also include the SQL Anywhere demo databases, it'll then ask you to install the PowerBuilder PowerServer Toolkit. That's the secondary toolbar that you'll see inside the IDE that allows you to converse between the PowerBuilder IDE and the PowerServer services that are running inside of IIS. The next question, however, is, am I happy with mobile-only applications? I don't require offline databases, which means databases that are stored on the particular mobile device, and I'm running the .NET version only of PowerServer. So if you answer yes to those questions, then you need to install PowerServer that's included with PowerBuilder Universal. This is going to be the mobile-only and .NET version of PowerServer. So now if you answer no to those questions, in other words, I do need a mobile and web, I do need mobile database on the device itself, and maybe I'd like to install a Java Enterprise Edition of PowerServer, and I may need other things such as clustering, load balancing, and failover. In that case, do not install PowerServer that's included with PowerBuilder 2017 Universal. You can proceed now to actually run the separate installation for PowerServer, which includes web and mobile, and all the features that I just listed above. Note, you can have PowerServer Mobile and PowerServer Web and Mobile installed. Just make sure that you do not install them on the same machine. In other words, if you install PowerServer Web and Mobile on a separate VM or a separate server, that's fine. The PowerBuilder IDE can communicate to both. However, what we're suggesting for the developer, if you know you're going to be using web and mobile, don't install the one that comes with PowerBuilder Universal. Focus only on the separate install. So for the PowerServer installation, we suggest that you have a look when you bring up the install dialog, that you look at, for example, View Server Settings. Make sure you read that just to make sure that you're fully knowledgeable of exactly what the server settings are. Also, feel free to read the README on system requirements and the installation guide. Again, just to familiarize yourself on the details. Then if you want, you can also look at the product manuals ahead of the install, getting started and installing PowerServer, just so you're comfortable with all the ins and outs of the PowerServer install, although it's pretty straightforward. Again, for this tutorial, we'll be using the 64-bit version of PowerServer install. So for verifying PowerBuilder 27 Universal, first thing you can go into the Windows 10 Start, and then you can select Settings, and from there, type in the search box Appeon PowerBuilder. From there, you know that Appeon PowerBuilder is installed, but you're not quite sure whether it's really the Universal because there are three versions: Standard, Cloud, and Universal. We need to make sure we have Universal. So in this case, once you start the PowerBuilder IDE, now that you know that it's there, go to the Help About. Make sure that the About box says Appeon PowerBuilder Universal Edition. The latest build as of this video is maintenance release number 1, or build 1681. Also verify, for example, that SQL Anywhere is installed. Again, you can go to Settings, you can type in SQL Anywhere, and you can see that different versions of SQL Anywhere have been installed. Again, we suggest using the later ones, which is from SAP version 16 or 17. From older versions of Windows, you'd go to Control Panel and then Programs. So verifying SQL Anywhere client. So what we suggest here, if you actually go to the application features from Windows 10, highlight SQL Anywhere 16 or 17 and select Modify. Again, you can do that in older versions of Windows by going to the Program and Features, again highlighting one of the versions 16 or 17, right-hand mouse, and then select Change. From there, that's going to bring up a dialog box that looks like this. Would you like to modify, repair, install, or remove? Select Modify and then Next. Well, that's going to get you to the next dialog, and the key here is the SQL Anywhere client. If you have the 32-bit version of SQL Anywhere installed, it's not an issue, because PowerBuilder and PowerServer will work with either 32-bitness of that particular flavor. However, if you have SQL Anywhere 64-bit installed, it's important that you select both clients, the 64-bit client and the 32-bit client. Why? Because PowerBuilder IDE uses 32-bit client, yet PowerServer itself will use the 64-bit client in this particular aspect. So again, if you see an X beside those and you have the 64-bit version of the server installed, make sure that you change that to a disk drive and make sure that both clients of 32 and 64-bit have been selected. Select the next box and install that particular missing piece. So verifying the .NET framework. If you have older version of Windows like 7 or 8, going to the Program and Features, selecting Turn Windows Features On or Off, just have a look at the installed .NET framework and you should see that the Microsoft .NET Framework 4 Extended has been installed. If not, you'll have to go to the Microsoft Developer Network MSDN website and download the .NET Framework for Windows 7 or 8. After installation, you should see this listed in the Programs and Features. If, however, you're on Windows 10, you will see it a little bit differently. It'll list it in the actual installed Programs and Features as the Microsoft .NET Framework 4 Multi-Targeting Pack. If, however, you've installed the Creator Edition, or after that the Fall Creator Edition, you're going to see a different dialog, which is the Windows 10 Creator Edition, which will now list the .NET Framework 4.5 Multi-Targeting Pack. Again, if it doesn't appear, please make sure you go to MSDN and download the .NET Framework Runtime for that particular Windows 10 version. We also suggest, if optionally, to download the .NET Framework SDK. The software development kit is used for web services only. Make sure again that you download the SDK that matches your Windows particular version, such as 7, 8, or 10. So adding the .NET Framework and IIS, or making sure that all the pieces are there. So for Windows 10, for example, we'll see that we open up the Turn Features On and Off. We should see that there's a .NET Framework installed, 3.5 for sure, which includes support for the older .NET 2.0. However, for newer .NET frameworks, we'll see 4.5, 4.6, or 4.7, depending on what version of Windows 10 that you have. If you have the Creator Edition, for example, you'll see that the .NET Framework installed now is version 4.7. Again, if you have the older version of Windows 7 or 8, you'll see only .NET Framework 4.0 installed. So we have to make sure at this point that we have the right features installed for not only the .NET Framework, but also IIS. Because remember, PowerServer is going to run as a subservice inside the Internet Information Server. So if we go to Windows Settings here in version 10, Applications, and then we go to Programs and Features, we'll see here what we have installed, Turn Windows Features On or Off. You notice if I start from the Windows 10 control panel, or I go to the older Windows 7 or 8 control panel, Programs and Features, I eventually get to the same point, which is Turn Windows Features On or Off. If I click on that, now we can see exactly what we saw in the PowerPoint slides. Notice that the .NET Framework is there. Again, if you see that listed and it's not checked, then make sure you check it. You'll notice underneath that you have two choices. ASP.NET 4.7, that's the piece that's required. Windows Communication Facility Services is optional. Again, if you're using Visual Studio or the older PowerBuilder.net, which is now end of life, you still may want to check the WCF services because you may be using them with different development tools. For Internet Information Services, if we expand that, you'll see three main areas: FTP, Web Management, and World Wide Web Services. For FTP Server, this is optional for PowerServer, but note that both PowerServer Mobile and PowerServer Web applications do have the ability to call FTP services and upload or download files from the IIS server. So if you're planning on using FTP in that aspect, make sure you check that, because that can be used in later application projects. For web management tools, you'll see here that we should have Web Management Console, Management Scripts and Tools, and Management Service. Those three should be checked. IIS management compatibility is optional. You only need to check that if you're using remote desktop into a machine that contains an older version of IIS. In the case of Windows 10, I'm actually using IIS version 10, so I really didn't need to check this, but it doesn't hurt. It's optional. If we look at the World Wide Web services, underneath that, application development features, common features, health, performance, and security are listed. Let's go to the application ones first. Notice that all of these should be checked. PowerServer has the ability to use these different particular features under application development features. So make sure they're all checked under this particular subheading. For common HTTP features, you'll see that default directory browsing, HTTP errors, redirection, and static content should be checked. If not, check them now. Web data publishing is optional. However, it doesn't hurt to check that. If we look at health and diagnostics, all of these should be actually checked. You can never have too much diagnostics when things go wrong, so we recommend that you check all of these. For performance features, the only thing that's required is dynamic content compression. PowerServer will definitely utilize that aspect to move data and application pieces back and forth between the web and mobile devices. However, it doesn't hurt to optionally turn on static content compression as well. For security, we suggest that you at least have request filtering and basic authentication. If you want, IP security and URL authorization is also suggested. Again, they're optional, but it never hurts to turn them all on. So once you've set the appropriate check marks for the features that you should have for PowerServer, hit OK and let Microsoft Operating System configure them appropriately. So for the .NET Framework, this only needs to be done if the .NET Framework is installed after IIS. So what happens now is the .NET Framework is not registered to IIS. If IIS is being installed after the .NET Framework and it sees it there, it will automatically register it. So in Windows 7 or 8, start the command console, make sure again that you run it in admin mode, and notice that you can actually type in ASP.NET_register_IIS.exe, and then you can actually run the registration, and that will introduce the .NET Framework to IIS. Again, this is not required if you install IIS after the .NET Framework is there. If you want to recycle IIS or do a restart, you can type in IIS reset, and then you're all done. Those two pieces have been introduced and you're ready to go. In the case of Windows 10, however, it doesn't work that way. You actually have to go to the .NET Framework folder and use the dism.exe utility application specifying enable feature, and then at the feature name, make sure that you specify the .NET Framework version that you have installed. So in this case, it'll be ASP.NET 4.5, 4.6, or 4.7, depending on whether you have different versions of the Windows 8 or Windows 10 operating system installed. Notice again, the command console needs to be run in admin mode in order to do this. And again, this only needs to be done if the .NET Framework was installed after IIS. The next thing we need to do, we need to make sure that IIS is up and running, and we'll see that of course because we'll be able to actually start the Internet Information Services Manager from your Windows console. Make sure that you open up the manager and set the .NET Trust and Information Services API. The .NET Trust will be full and ISPA will be allowed. So in my particular console, you'll see here that we have the ability now to set the .NET Trust levels. If I double click that, there's different values that you can set. If they're set to anything but full, make sure that you now select full instead and set it to that particular .NET Trust level. Once we return back to the manager and scroll down a little bit, you'll see that inside of IIS we have Internet Services API and Common Gateway or CGI icon restrictions. Double click that icon and then look for the .NET framework. Again, PowerServer is going to be using version 4. You'll notice that there's a 32-bit version of the framework and a 64-bit version of the framework installed. So notice when you look at the .NET Framework 4.0, if you see anything that says restriction not allowed, use the right-hand mouse button. From the pop-up menu, select allow. Notice that when you're done, both the 64-bit and 32-bit frameworks should have allow set for IIS API and CGI restrictions. The next thing to do is actually look at the folder security for IIS itself. The main root folder is called www, and the main user is IIS iUsers. That particular user has to be authenticated to www root folder, and it has to have full control. So looking at my file manager, you can see under the Windows C drive iNet pub, if I double click a little bit lower, we'll see www root. Just as a preview, if I double click www root, you'll notice that there's an Appeon folder underneath www root. Once you've finished installing PowerServer, you'll see this folder, and then you'll see all the subfolders under that. And that's PowerServer itself. Going back to www root, however, we need to use the right-hand mouse button, select Properties, go to Security, and then make sure that IIS User has been set. So if you don't see IIS User on that particular folder, iNet pub www root, select the Edit button and add that user at this point. When you come back, make sure that you've specified that you allow full control for IIS User on www root and all of its subfolders. Coming near the end here, what we have to do is also make sure that IIS is up and running, everything looks good, and we can test that very quickly by just picking up any web browser and typing in localhost. So you see here in my Microsoft Edge browser in Windows 10, I'll just type in //localhost and we'll see whether IIS responds. And it does, which means that IIS is up and running, has been installed correctly. We know the .NET framework is there, so everything looks good at this point. The last thing you may want to do is make sure that the IIS security has been set. And again, we do that from the Windows control panel under Internet Options and make sure that localhost has been added to the trusted sites. So you can see here now from the control panel, I'm going to select Internet Options. And now I can go to Security, Trusted Sites. And then if I click on the Sites button, we can have a look and see what websites have been trusted. In this case, you can see I've already added localhost to that particular list of websites. If it wasn't there, however, then that's what I type in, http://localhost. And then I would add that to the zone. And once you're done, hit close. And now localhost has been added as a trusted site. So completing all those steps, congratulations. You're now ready to install PowerServer 2017, either the PowerServer Mobile version that comes with PowerBuilder Universal, or the separate PowerServer Web and Mobile 2017, the separate installation.